Show, the only true democracy in talk radio. Of, for, and by you, the people. Live nationwide and streaming live at lesliemarshallshow.com.
Here to set you free. How you doing? I'm Leslie Marshall. Welcome or welcome back. Only true democracy in talk. Now, I know that you're going to see our guest who we have coming up, and you're not going to see me. And the other day I told you, oh, you can't see me because of the heat wave. Well, my camera's always on, so when I shut it off now, I can't turn it back on. So we're going to get that fixed over the weekend. And next week, you'll be able to see me again. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I don't want to know. I just, I'm letting you know. But today we have, and you can see him, so can I, Scott Paul. Scott is president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Now, the AAM are a partnership established by some of America's leading manufacturers and the United Steelworkers Union. And for almost 2 decades, Scott and the AAM have worked to make American manufacturing a top-of-mind issue for voters and our national leaders, and they've done it through effective advocacy, innovative research, and a savvy PR strategy. Check out their website, americanmanufacturing.org. Follow them on X at Keep It Made in USA, and follow Scott there on X at Scott Paul AAM. Scott, more than a pleasure to have you back with us. Thank you for rejoining us. Always good to have you with us.
Likewise, it's great to be with you. I always love your voice, Leslie, and next time I'll also look forward to seeing you again, but totally understand.
Okay. It's a deal. Thank you. There are a lot of people who say, the economy is bad and the number one issue among voters is the economy. For the most part, the economy is good. It's improving. But there's one thing that people are afraid of, and that's inflation, and another, and that's high interest rates. And supposedly this month, the Feds are going to drop, and it's sort of like, well, we're almost halfway into September. Where is that drop? But the interest rates, the high interest rates, are specifically not just hurting the American people, but they're hurting a sector of the working class, and that is the American manufacturing sector. There was a promise of record factory construction, but instead, U.S. factories lost 24,000 jobs in August, which if I were a Republican listening to this, I'd be jotting down for Trump's next speech instead of talking about geese and cats and dogs. But why is that? Why are the factories losing these jobs? Why were 24,000 jobs lost in August after the Bureau of Labor Statistics put out their latest report on job gains and job loss? Why that many, and why specifically in manufacturing? And why do you think it's linked specifically to the interest rates?
Yeah. I'm happy to work through that because obviously the candidates are spending a lot of time in manufacturing states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin. So these figures matter quite a bit. That monthly loss, and you don't know if there's a trend until it starts showing up for a while. I mean, that was a pretty steep decline, but part of it could have been because of some scheduled summer maintenance, which is not uncommon. But here is the one thing we do know, and that is that the Federal Reserve has had interest rates so high that it does impact manufacturing, and it impacts it in a couple of different ways. First, it has the impact of creating more demand for dollars from overseas. That drives up the value of the dollar, and that makes our exports less competitive. So there's less of a market there. It actually makes imports less expensive coming into the United States. Second is that it drives up the cost of borrowing. And so if you're a consumer looking for a house or a car, you might think twice, or anything else that needs financing. And I know a lot of people who have been through that. And then the third way is that it impacts manufacturers themselves. If they're looking to expand, you generally have to finance that. You have to pay interest rates on that amount that you're financing. The interest rates are kind of high, so they might hesitate doing that, making those capital improvements that could support some more employment, and that also decreases that type of demand for capital equipment as well. And so you get all of that together, and it adds up to some weakness in the manufacturing sector from a jobs perspective. Now, let me point out very quickly that we have recovered, more than recovered, all the jobs that were lost during the last recession that was induced by.
And I'm glad you say that, because whenever these reports come out, there's always the people that look at the glass half full and those who look at it half empty. And even though I'm a pessimist, I'm also a realist, and I like facts over fiction. And even if those facts don't line up and help my beliefs politically, ideologically, et cetera, and a lot of people will say, oh, no, those aren't job gains. They're just jobs that we had lost that we're getting back. And that's not, like you said, that's not the case. Manufacturing did gain back those jobs in the sector from the pandemic. So this is sort of like a new chapter, another page that's turned of numbers, new numbers that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I'm not the one who's going to do the political economy here and say, what happened in Democratic administrations versus Republican administrations. But, Biden's record on creating manufacturing jobs is just, if you look at the BLS data, way better than Trump's. And there's really no disputing that. But, I think the thing that I am optimistic about as we look ahead, Leslie, is that I do think on September 17th, which is when the Fed meets next, that they will cut interest rates, that will have some impact, if not immediately, then over the next couple of months in spurring a little more activity with respect to manufacturing. And that'll be helpful. And then we haven't gotten to, and I know we will, all the reasons to be really bullish about manufacturing as we look ahead because of a lot of the industrial policies that have been put into place.
You recently joined C-SPAN's Washington Journal, excuse me, and you had this to say on the matter, quote, even though there's basically record factory construction in the United States, those jobs aren't built yet. Those factories are still being constructed. So we're at a point where the interest rate cuts could really be beneficial to spurring some capital investment in manufacturing, to spur some more consumer incentives in the United States. You went on to say, but I think it proves the point that we've been saying all along, that the Federal Reserve's action has had an outsized impact on the fortunes of manufacturing. So I'm hoping they will act decisively with a big rate cut the next time they meet. Speaking of, the Feds are scheduled to meet, the Federal Reserve, though that Fed, not the other Feds, on September 17th, with a policy announcement expected on the 18th. Everyone pretty much is expecting a rate cut, the economic forecasters and things like that. Is there a specific, and I'm not going to get into, wonky math with you. I know that's not your thing or mine. Is there a specific cut that the manufacturing center, a percentage, is looking for? Or, will any percentage cut at this point be helpful and beneficial to gain back some of that 24K loss?
Yeah. Well, I think that there is a 99.9% chance that it'll be at least a quarter, or as they say, 25 basis points. I think there's a decent chance it could be a 0.5% or 50 basis points. And then, if you look at the projections that Wall Street makes, they think that they're going to, that interest rates will be brought down about 2.5% over a number of months, right? That there'll be some consecutive rate cuts. And I did a very unscientific poll on LinkedIn, Leslie, and 60% of the respondents thought that we needed at least a 50 basis point or 0.5% cut. So we'll see what happens, but that's kind of what we have to look forward to, I think.
Absolutely. I think you and others have referred to this as draconian, right? The interest rates where they're at. But one of the things about the economy, and again, I'm not like a math wonk by any means. When my kids would ask, "Can you help with my homework?" I'm like, "Ask Dad." Always. That's with math. Ask Dad. Any other subject, I'm good, but not math. It's not my thing, and I think people, get confused because they'll see things improving on the one hand, and rates going up, and inflation coming down, but then inflation comes down too fast, and if job gains come up too fast, that kind of throws everything into a tailspin as well. So I think it's really hard for the average person, the average worker, the average voter, to fully understand it. Really, I think they understand headlines, which is like economy good, right? I'm not trying to make everybody sound like Fred Flintstone here, but economy good, inflation good, inflation bad, and then again, where are they getting their information from? Right? We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with Scott Paul. He's president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, the AAM. Check out their website. A lot of great things, especially where you can buy American-made products. Go to AmericanManufacturing.org. Follow Scott on X at ScottPaulAAM, and follow AAM at Keep It Made in USA. Back after this.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recognize them? By their clothes, their age, the way they speak? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a single father of 2 who works 3
part-time jobs and still can't put enough food on the table?
Or maybe a mother who cleans offices at night,
hoping to find meeting leftovers to take home to her hungry family.
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time
landing a job and getting back on his feet.
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. People you pass by every day but never knew were hungry. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America, 200 Food Banks Strong, and the Ad Council.
We are back. Money, money, money. Right? That is what people want to have more of, or feel like they have more of. That's what we hear from voters. And when we look at individual sectors, whether it's, the corporations that we're talking to, the workers we're talking to, everybody wants more of it, right? We never seem to, I don't know about you. I seem to, it seems to go out faster every month than it comes in. That's for sure. Scott Paul is our guest, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. And Scott, by the way, you can follow him on X at Scott Paul AAM. Follow the AAM at Keep It Made in USA. And the website for the AAM is AmericanManufacturing.org. Scott, thank you for holding. Welcome back. Anything else that you want to say regarding the interest rates, regarding the factory loss of 24,000 jobs in the month of August before we move on to our next issue?
No, here's the other 2 things I want to say about being optimistic, looking forward to the future. The first is that it's clear inflation is coming down. I mean, all the data shows that, and it's coming down to a very low level, like pre-pandemic levels, which is good. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so I think everybody is going to feel welcomed by that. And the question is, will the corporations bring their prices down? Because they need to. They shouldn't be, gouging consumers. And then the second thing is wages are continuing to rise, which is also a good thing. So that means that your relative spending power is actually going up, despite, again, what you may hear all over the place. There's actually more money in your pocket to pay more reasonable bills now. And yeah, granted, it wasn't that way 2 years ago, but it is that way now, and it continues to get better, Leslie.
And that's a good thing. I mean, anything, positive after, many of us were terrified, in 2020. And I think in the back of a lot of our minds, we knew that someday we would get back, make it back, be back to where we were. But it does take time. And, we as Americans are very impatient. I'm, one of the most impatient people alive. I want to talk to you about a piece in the New York Times Magazine. You brought this to our attention. It's written by Dan Kaufman, How NAFTA Broke American Politics. Some people may say, NAFTA? the North American the NAFTA, the North American Federation Trade Agreement, right? Am I right on that?
Free trade agreement,
Free
right?
trade agreement, right? And people, when they think of NAFTA, think about Bill Clinton and Ross Perot in the early 90s, and they think, why are we talking about that now? They forget NAFTA had an effect then that obviously still ripples down today. In this piece, Dan Kaufman argues that the passage of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, altered communities, altered politics, altered economic fortunes. Do you agree with that? And if so, how did it do that? Because we are looking back, to, the like 1992 or 93.
Yeah. Yeah, it was wow, it was more than 30 years ago. Man, do I feel old after saying that it was passed. That's one of the first 5 years of my career fighting against that. But yeah, so I agree with everything that Dan Kaufman wrote, and I'm just only jealous that he's a way better writer than I am, because that was is a profound argument that he makes in the New York Times, and actually some great pictures if you actually have either the digital subscription or you get a copy of the New York Times Magazine. So the way in which it affected, I'll start with the economics first. The idea was that that we would trade more with Mexico, that would raise wages in Mexico, they would buy more American products, and everybody would win. Okay, that's basically the idea. What happened was the opposite, is that companies used NAFTA to send American jobs to Mexico. They paid the Mexican workers the same. Mexican workers weren't buying our products. We saw a lot of factories closed down, and first in textile and garment and kind of basic manufacturing, and then moving electronics, televisions, and then moving up all of the supply chain. We've seen it in agriculture too. You saw it in avocados and asparagus and a lot of other types of crops. And so, so that's one way economically. The other way economically is that employers now had a cudgel to place over workers, and they could say, you know what, unless you agree to these concessions, we're going to move the plant to Mexico. Or, if you want to form a union, we're going to send the plant to Mexico. And we know through academic research that actually happened more after NAFTA than before. So that's the economic impact. It did impact manufacturing jobs in the United States. Now, that led to communities, and that's the second part of his piece. And I think this is the part where a lot of these communities that have manufacturing plants, it was the largest employer, or it paid the best wages, particularly for workers that didn't have a 4-year college degree. And what came in and replaced it, whether it was a Walmart or whatever, couldn't match it, couldn't match the jobs, couldn't match the wages. And so those communities overall became poorer, even if even if you didn't work in manufacturing or lose your job to manufacturing. Those communities felt a downward pressure as well. And then finally, politically. And this is what happened as well, is that people looked at Bill Clinton as being one of the architects of NAFTA, and they're not completely wrong about that, although it was Bush who negotiated it and Clinton who signed it. And looked at Democrats as being kind of part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And there were a fair number of congressional Democrats that supported it. There were a lot who opposed it too. And Republicans did a very good job about demagoguing about this, and they would link it in with immigration or fear of that, which I obviously think is wrong. But it was useful for people like Perot or Pat Buchanan or Trump, obviously, to utilize this politically. And there's actually good social science research that shows that if you thought NAFTA cost jobs, if you respond positively to that question, then there's like a 67% chance that you're more likely to vote Republican now. And that's a flip. I mean, it used to be the working class that supported Democrats who were concerned about this. And so obviously you see Biden, as I know we've talked about, and you see Harris and Waltz charting a different course on this. But it's really had that impact. And as those manufacturing jobs declined, the manufacturing unions declined, their political clout declined. And so you saw more right to work laws that put downward pressure on wages. And you saw other impacts of that. So it sounds innocuous, but this has actually been a policy change that had a pretty radical impression, and not in a good way, I think, on American politics.
Let's talk about a specific company, a specific case, right? Ups and downs of Master Lock in Milwaukee, right? That's a case study. It was a thriving company. It used NAFTA to fatten its profit, and it did it at the expense of workers in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah, it sure did. And everybody knows who Master Lock is, right? And
Absolutely.
So this company was making tons of money.
I got Master Lock in my house, outside my house. Yeah.
That's right. Because it's about durability and quality. And the workers in Milwaukee built that company up. At any rate, they were doing fine, making plenty of profits, but they wanted to make more. So they moved the jobs to Mexico. Those were good union jobs that were lost. At one point in time in the Obama administration, they decided to reshore a little work because they were having quality problems, not surprisingly. But then more recently, they decided to close the plant down again. And this is the challenge here, is that, they were making a profit, but they weren't making enough for the shareholders. And so who suffers? The community suffers, the workers suffer. And so that neighborhood in Milwaukee has been absolutely devastated by manufacturing job loss, and will take generations to recover, Leslie.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Scott and talk more about this and other issues all surrounding manufacturing, trade, stuff like that. Stick around.
Whoa, a new digital music player. Thanks, Mom.
Oh, I'm glad you like it, because I can't wait to toss the big stereo. And now
My
that we got your dad that big HD TV he wanted,
said 10
we
seconds.
can
I
throw
thought I got
out our
right
old
out.
TV too.
Hold up. You can't just throw out.
We are back. We are me, Leslie Marshall, and our guest, Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Check out their website, americanmanufacturing.org. Follow Scott on X at Scott Paul AAM, and follow the AAM at Keep It Made in USA. Scott, thank you for holding. Welcome back. We were talking in the last segment before the break about a piece in the New York Times Magazine by Dan Kaufman entitled "How NAFTA Broke American Politics, North American Free Trade Agreement." God didn't have enough coffee today. And one of the things you had mentioned before the break is the Obama administration. And for many years, both parties pushed the notion that free trade would ultimately be good for America. You've mentioned that. And that definitely seems to have changed. What do you think the Harris and Walz campaign are doing to differentiate themselves from what Obama did on trade and Clinton did on trade?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there really is a battle for the working class here, right? And we talked more about like how if you felt left behind by NAFTA, you were more likely to vote Republican. And so I do think, it's interesting to note that, Walz and Harris, when they were, a senator, member of Congress specifically, kind of like voted against more trade authority, or voted against the U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement, indicated they would vote against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And so they definitely represent the more populist version of that. That's always been there, by the way, within the Democratic Party, but just not represented by its national ticket. And so in addition to that, they're also, they also want to pass legislation to make it to guarantee the right to organize, and to help level that playing field for employees who want to do that. And so I do think that that's a separation from what we saw in the past. And you've even seen the current Biden-Harris administration step away from the policies. Catherine Tai, in my estimation, has been the best U.S. trade representative we've ever had. And she's done an amazing job, and her priority is workers and trade enforcement, and it's not doing free trade agreements. And I think that's really important. So I think both Harris and Walz really, their voting record is different than we've seen from national tickets in the past for Democrats. And what they say about moving forward is a lot different as well. And they also have some things to build upon in the Biden administration. So to try to kind of regain that connection with those working class communities where it's been frayed over the last 30 years.
No, it definitely has, and that's why we see those, very heavy blue collar states, very heavy union worker states, manufacturing states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. Just three examples to like, what do they say? If you don't win Pennsylvania, forget it. You're not going to be sitting in the Oval Office.
Right?
Huh?
The blue wall.
The blue wall. Yeah. Absolutely. But like I like to say as a Democrat, it's a blue.
One other note about that, because there is a state like Ohio, right, which voted for Obama twice, right? I think that's hard to even fathom right now.
Senator Sherrod Brown, who, even though they keep calling it a toss-up, has a good, healthy lead.
Yeah, and this is the point: is that nationally, I think from a presidential perspective, Democrats have kind of given up on Ohio, right? They're like, that's a red state. But then you have someone like Sherrod Brown who's against
and you also remember, by the way, on Fox News, where I'm a contributor, it was Karl Rove when Ohio, as soon as Obama won Ohio, it was over and people were flipping out.
That's right.
That even more so than when Arizona was called for Biden. No, not more so, probably more so Arizona called for Biden. But people were flipping out that Wait, what do you mean? Not all the states have reported yet that, Ohio was it. As soon as Obama won Ohio, it was like, he's president. That's it.
That's right. And the only point I was going to make is that folks like Sherrod Brown, or even Tim Ryan, who didn't win, but who did better than the ticket, and Marcy Kaptur, who is from Toledo, who's had a lot of tough races, they outperform every other Democrat, in part because they've got this populist trade pro-worker stance and the credentials for it. So that obviously, what does that tell me? That matters to voters, if that is the case, Leslie.
Noah Smith is an economist who many people know and some people have never heard of, but he wrote a great piece. And Marky Mark was just off the air, telling you a great piece that, we're going to be, talking about. And it says Biden did stuff and it looks like it's working so far. And, the whole thing with Bidenomics, it reminds me of Obamacare and, very much how Barack Obama said, if it works, they won't call it Obamacare. If it fails, they will. And obviously everybody on the right calls it the Affordable Care Act because over 50 million people have gotten insurance with the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare. So Bidenomics, is working, right? For the first time in our history, the United States is facing a rival that can out-manufacture it, right?
Yeah.
This is a very big deal. Some would say it's not a Republican or Democrat blame. The blame is equal because if you go back into the George W. Bush administration or the Barack Obama administration, they at the time perhaps obviously didn't seem to recognize how big a deal this was. Would you agree? So let's talk about it. Obviously, we're talking about China being that rival that can out-manufacture us. Have we lost decades looking back, and I know hindsight's always 2020, in which we could have addressed this problem? And what do we do going forward? Because it is very dangerous that China can out-manufacture us because there's different levels of power a country can have, and manufacturing productivity, having another country, and we saw that in COVID, dependent upon you for anything is very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I think most people will get this. I mean, one of the advantages we had in the Cold War with the Soviet Union is that we had a far bigger economy, right? And we were able to generate more wealth that way. And both from a technology perspective and from just a resource perspective, we were able to outlast the Soviet Union in a lot of different ways. I mean, there's other things that you can mix into that, like ideology and what have you. But the truth is, we just had more, and it's because we made more stuff. And that, unfortunately, for the last 15 years almost, hasn't been the case with China. Is that we have a rival who can make more stuff than we can. And so right now, China is a strategic competitor. We're not in a shooting war. We're not even in a full-fledged Cold War because we have plenty of trade with China, although there's a lot of concerns about some of that trade. And so it really does beg the question, like, did we blow it? And we obviously can't rewind the last 30 years and do things differently. But I do think that the Biden administration has done a good job of saying, hey, we got to get our stuff together and let's do it first in a couple of key areas that we're going to need moving forward, like from technology, like high-tech semiconductors or new energy sources, clean energy, or the next generation of transportation is going to be electric. And we got to get in that game as well. Or a number of critical supply chains that we've realized at various times over the last decade or two, that if there is some disruption to shipping or somewhere else in the world, like China or Japan, that who gets screwed? We do, because we don't have access to it.
Absolutely.
And so, and so all of this has indicated that we got to do things a little differently. And so I do think that we're starting down that road, which is pretty great. But it literally, I mean, if you expect this to be like instant results, like a stimulus check, no, that's not what this is. This is going to take a little time to get going, just like a big infrastructure project, right? You don't do them in a day. It takes longer than a day. It takes months and it takes years and it takes a lot of commitment to do this correctly. And, voters, I don't know, they'll certainly recognize it in another 4 years and in 8 years and 12 and 16 years, and it'll become even more apparent. But today, you have to kind of wake folks up with this, because it's not right there in front of them just yet, Leslie.
We're going to be taking a break, but when you say, voters don't recognize it, Donald Trump did recognize it, to his credit. And we're going to talk about him when we come back. We're also going to talk about current President Joe Biden and whether they actually did something about it or not, and what needs to be done about it. Because I'm going to give credit. Donald Trump did recognize what Scott is talking about. But did he understood it, but what did he do about it? We'll be back right after this. Don't go away.
If you're about to purchase a new mower, chainsaw, generator, or other piece of outdoor power equipment, you need to know how to protect it. For instance, the gasoline you put in it. I'm Chris Kaiser, president of the Outdoor Power Equipment Institute. Most gas now contains 10% ethanol, and that's okay. But some gas pumps are changing. Higher ethanol gas blends, like E15, E30, and E85, may be available at a local station, and they may be cheaper. But it's harmful and illegal to use in outdoor power equipment. And what you put in your car may no longer be safe for other engines. When getting gas, look before you pump. Price is no longer the way to choose your fuel. You have to choose the right fuel, because not having the right fuel for the right product can damage or destroy the equipment. Look before you pump. Protect your equipment. Stick with E10 or less. A consumer can find out about which fuels are appropriate for outdoor power equipment use at lookbeforeyoupump.com.
We are back. I am Leslie Marshall. Hello, welcome or welcome back. And we welcome back Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. You can check out more about what they do. You can also check out they have so much information, and I find it so helpful as a consumer. If you want to buy made in America products and you want to support businesses that do make their products in America, go to americanmanufacturing.org. Also follow them on X. There's a lot of only, and not just great articles and and posting and information about manufacturing in the United States and what's going on and where it's headed, but a lot of those companies that are spotlighted and highlighted by Scott and and American Manufacturing, the folks at the AAM. Scott also does great interviews and blogs, podcasts, all that stuff, and it's really helpful as a consumer. Go to at Keep It Made in the USA on X, and for Scott, follow him on X at Scott Paul AAM. Scott, thank you for holding. Welcome back. Continue our discussion about economist Noah Smith and his piece. Biden did stuff, and it looks like it's working so far. And we were talking about China, specifically that China is a rival that can outmanufacture us and that it's dangerous. And for decades, nobody seemed to recognize it or address the problem. And then I said before the break, Donald Trump actually did recognize it. My question to you is, did Donald Trump address the problem? Did he actually do anything about it?
Yeah. Yeah, so that is a great question. And it's really interesting that you said that, because I'm thinking back to conversations I had with folks from the Obama administration who, had the kind of traditional approach towards China is like, let's talk to them and things will happen. And they all said at the end of the administration that they got played, basically, that the Chinese government ran out the clock and they totally missed the boat on this. And yeah, Trump did recognize this. I mean, he talked about it a lot. He said he was going to take action. He did put some tariffs into place, but as we've discussed, I mean, tariffs can be valuable, but if they just happen in a vacuum, they're going to have not nearly as a big of an impact and big of a benefit as if they're accompanied by other things. And it's that other things that separates Biden from Trump on this, is that yes, Trump did recognize some of this, but he also stopped a lot of things from fully taking effect, like some sanctions and some other types of restrictions on investment. Even though he talked about China a lot, and he did put some tariffs on, but I think Biden has really fine-tuned a lot of that. And then he's added this whole other side about getting our economy ready to support more manufacturing, since all it had been for the last 3 decades was outsourcing, offshoring, deindustrialization, and a whittling down of the manufacturing base. He's kind of like, lifting it up again, along with a lot of those tariff actions.
When you talk about the Biden administration, I know two people that you have a lot of respect for and he had help from these people, obviously, are appointees like Jake Sullivan, Gina Raimondo, who actually made a serious attempt to do something about America's industrial weakness, compared to China. Can you talk about the approach? There's like a 4 basic pillar approach that the Biden administration, specifically Sullivan and Raimondo, did with regard to America's weakness vis-a-vis China.
Yeah, well, one we just talked about, which was the tariffs, but there are a couple of others. The other is sanctions, and making sure that China doesn't have access to Western developed technology that would allow them to leapfrog ahead generations and then be put to use against us, either militarily or strategically or economically. And then a third component of this is, investing in our own capacity, as we've talked about, to do semiconductors and do clean energy, and to do some of the other industries of the future, and to invest and to upgrade in our infrastructure. And another component of this has been to engage our allies more fully, so that it's a holistic strategy, so that it's not just the United States alone that's doing this, but that we are but that Europe is taking some actions, Canada is taking some actions, even Mexico and some other countries, and so that there's more of of a larger front standing up to some of China's unfair trade practices. And so I think that has been effective. At the same time, we're still talking to the Chinese about difficult challenges. So that has really set it apart, I think, from where the Trump administration landed on its China policy.
Yeah, you had mentioned tariffs, which Trump administration certainly had that. But one thing that Joe Biden has that no other president has had is industrial policy, right? I mean, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, because that encourages American manufacturing in strategic industries. Would you agree that plays into this? And
I think that plays probably the biggest role and is probably the most transformative policy that this administration has. And as we discussed on the earlier segment, you're just literally not going to see it right now. I mean, you'll see it more in 2 years, and you'll see it even more in 4 years, and 6 and 8. And it reminds me of a lot of the great forays we've made into industrial policy over the years, from Alexander Hamilton to the Erie Canal, to Henry Clay's American System, to and I hope people are Googling all of this right now if they don't know what it is, to the Transcontinental Railroad and the land-grant college system under the Lincoln administration, to the Arsenal for Democracy or the interstate highway system. I mean, we have a history of doing big things and doing them great when we put our mind to it. And so we're embarking down that path on the next generation of semiconductors and a new generation of energy in the United States, and a new generation of transportation in the United States, and an infrastructure to support all of that through a modernized electrical grid and highway system and bridge system and broadband and all of that. And so there's going to be a massive benefit to our economy, to our society, to jobs from all of this. And yeah, I mean, that's if it continues, because there's certainly some Republicans and who want to scale this back, and I think that would be ill-advised. But it is both the scope and the scale is really transformational in modern times. We haven't seen anything like it. Perhaps also I would throw in the space program, obviously, but that's that's really it. But this is this is a BFD. In the words of the president himself, as he was talking about the Affordable Care Act back in the day.
You talked about semiconductors, semiconductor manufacturing, and with semiconductors and semiconductor manufacturing equipment that's sold to China, there are export controls, right? We haven't had that before. I would imagine that weighs in and makes a big difference, or maybe not. Because tariffs, you've said before, they've had an effect. It's just too early to tell what effect, right, and how much of an effect. But there is an area that some people aren't familiar with called friendshoring, right? Friendshoring and reshoring of supply chains, especially of critical minerals. And friendshoring has actually made some progress. Then again, we're going to look at 10 or 15 years down the road to really see those results. Can you talk to us briefly about those export controls and friendshoring and how that plays into this?
Yeah, and you're talking to someone who wants to see as much manufacturing in the United States as possible, but I'm also a realist. There's some stuff that we just don't have the capacity to do here, and we probably won't in the future as well. And so we'd rather have a trusted supplier than an unreliable supplier. And so that's the role that friendshoring plays. And that's also how the tariffs kind of help, is if the tariffs are very steep on products from China, well, let's get our friends to help us with that. And as long as those aren't like resulting in American jobs leaving to go to those countries, I don't have a beef with it. I think it's actually part of a holistic policy, and particularly with some types of critical minerals, we just don't have the stuff here. We don't have enough of it. So we're going to need our allies. And so I think that's an important piece of all of this as well, Leslie.
Oh, no, absolutely. If you were, we're out of time, right? Do we have one more segment, or are we done? This is it. I'm sorry. Okay, Scott, I can't even give you a minute. I can't even give you the last word. I have like 15 seconds now. But in the 15 seconds, let me tell you this. Scott is president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. You can check out their website. Like I said, there's a plethora of information there, americanmanufacturing.org. On X, follow them at Keep It Made in USA. Again, a plethora of information. And follow Scott at Scott Paul AAM. He's got a lot of great stuff. He's constantly on the Hill testifying. And he has no political fight in this game. He's not running for office. He's not batting for one team or the other. The team he's batting for is you, the middle class, American worker, the working class, which is the majority of our nation, and what built this nation and continues to keep this nation great. And I'm going to say we don't need to make it great again. We are great. Anyway, that's my little political leaning. I'm Leslie Marshall. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Mark Grimaldi, our executive producer, and thanks again in this hour to Scott Paul, president of the AAM.